Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is out in cinemas now, and here's a full spoiler review.
Indiana Jones!
Archimedes' dial. I've been looking for this all my life. You stole it.
Then you stole it.
And then I stole it.
Does Dial of Destiny justify bringing out an 80-year-old Harrison Ford for one last swashbuckling adventure? Is Phoebe Waller-Bridge as annoying as many have speculated? And is the film any good? I'm afraid to say it's not. Indiana Jones 5 is a rather depressingly bad movie. Now, I try to be pretty positive when it comes to reviewing films. I try to give a balanced review and stay away from exaggeration, but Dial of Destiny was the worst film of the last 100 years. I'm joking of course. It's not the worst film of all time, but it might, for me, be the worst Indiana Jones film, and it was a real disappointment. I'm not a hardcore Indiana Jones fan, but I've watched and enjoyed all the movies. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull to a lesser extent, of course. And I imagine, like you, I had reservations going into Dial of Destiny. The reviews from critics who got to see the film early were mixed at best. The sheer age of Harrison Ford, as the oldest action hero, I believe ever, and the almost universal lack of enthusiasm for the film. On top of Lucasfilm's rather appalling track record of how they treat legacy characters. So for these reasons, I certainly didn't have high expectations going to watch the film. Everything you might have guessed would be bad with Dial of Destiny is bad. Indy is way too old to be an action protagonist. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who plays Indy's goddaughter, Helena, is very cringe and very unlikable. The film is way too long and has a really slow, boggy middle section, and Indiana Jones somewhat receives the Luke Skywalker Last Jedi treatment, of being a defeated, wallowing in self-pity old man, very much past his prime. But quickly, before going over the plot and elaborating on why this film doesn't justify its existence, let's focus on a few positives first. So Harrison Ford delivers some emotional moments, and the occasional funny, quippy line. Ford still has a leading man magic, and is often given time and space to shine. Also, the de-aging CGI used in the opening scene is really good. Lucasfilm's deepfake technology has come on leaps and bounds since Rogue One and a Princess Leia cameo.
What is it they've sent us?
Hope.
Also, the ending I did find to be really promising and rather creative, but then the ending gets totally and utterly ruined, so it doesn't really count. But the route that Dial of Destiny looked like it would go down was really interesting, until it wasn't. The Dial of Destiny being a time travel device, but it only takes them back to one set point in time. I really like that idea. And the visuals and sound effects were great, especially during the opening World War II sequence and the ending taking place in 202 BC in Syracuse. So on to a brief summary of the plot. In 1945, Basil Shaw, played by Toby Jones, and Indiana snatch half of the dial from Dr. Voller. The dial drives Basil insane, and he believes that the dial, created by Archimedes, can be used to time travel. And Basil dies perhaps a decade later off screen. Then we move to 1969 New York, on Moon Landing Day, and Indy has divorce papers on the table from Marion. Also, we find out that his son Matt died in the Vietnam-US War, and Indy has been a university professor for the last decade. Helena, Basil's daughter and Indiana's goddaughter, head to New York, and she tricks Indy into giving her half of Archimedes' dial. Helena is in debt, on bail, and on the run from Dr. Voller's goons. Dr. Voller now works for the US as a scientist, helping to win the space race for the Americans. Helena wants to sell the dial in an illegal market in Tangier, and Dr. Voller wants the dial so that he can go back in time, kill Hitler, and win World War II for the Nazis, as its new leader. For the next hour and a half, Indy, Helena, and her young teenage sidekick Teddy team up and find the other half of the dial. Dr. Voller and his boys take the dial from Indy, and then Indy gets shot in the upper chest. And we find out that the dial can transport you back in time by predicting when there will be a time fissure in the middle of a big storm every 30 years or so. Dr. Voller, with the now completed dial and wounded Indy in hand, gets aboard a Nazi-designed aeroplane and heads towards the time fissure in the big storm overhead. Helena manages to grab onto the plane's wheel and makes it aboard the plane too. Teddy, who is maybe 12 or 13 years old, knows how to fly a plane, because of course he does. And they all head through the time fissure in the eye of the storm. When they come out of the other end of the storm, they realise that they have been transported to 212 BC Sicily during the Roman siege of Archimedes' city, Syracuse. And we find out the time fissure the dial pointed to can only return someone to the final days of the Roman siege on Syracuse in 212 BC, and not 1939 that Dr. Voller anticipated. Dr. Voller's plane gets shot down as it gets caught in a crossfire of the Syracuse and Roman ballistas and spears. Helena rescues Indy, and Dr. Voller dies off screen in a subsequent plane crash. Indiana and Helena meet Archimedes, and Indy, still with a bullet in his chest, wants to stay in 212 BC with Archimedes, as he could now be an active part of the historical event that he had studied for most of his life. Helena, worried about Indy causing a time paradox, punches him in the face, and takes him onto Teddy's plane as they fly through the time fissure back to 1969. Indy then wakes up in his apartment and is rejoined by Salah and then by Marion. Indy and Marion patch things up and seem no longer to be getting divorced. The final scene is of Indy's hat and a hand, which I believe is Indy's, reaching out to grab it, and then we cut to black. So for my scoring of Indiana Jones 5, the plot scores 7, entertainment value scores 5, characters and performances score 6, visuals get an 8 out of 10, and sound gets a 7. Sadly, John Williams seems to have had a rare off day with the score, and it feels like it's on autopilot. There were no notable additions to the score of the previous 4 films. That being said, Indy's theme song is still one of the greats. And the ending scores 5, leaving my overall rating for the film at 63%. So there are 3 main issues that I have with Dial of Destiny, as to why the film really didn't work for me. These issues being the depressing tone, the obnoxious side characters, and the ending. The opening World War II sequence, with a de-aged Indy and his companion Basil Shaw, had the heroic, exciting, and plucky Indiana Jones feel that the original trilogy and even Crystal Skull had. The adventure style that is quintessential Indy, but the following 2 hours after the opening are miserable. Indy is estranged from Marion, his son is dead, and Helena calls him old every other sentence. In the end, he preferred to stay in 212 BC with Archimedes than in the present day, with his sad life as a boring university lecturer just waiting to die. Dial of Destiny also did the Disney Lucasfilm classic of taking a once happy conclusion to a franchise and destroying it off screen to set up their sequel film. Star Wars: Return of the Jedi left Han and Leia happy together, Palpatine defeated, and Luke Skywalker to lead the next Jedi Order. Then the Star Wars sequels came along. Han and Leia are estranged, Luke is a failure, and Palpatine is back. The same story arc happens in Indy 5. In the ending of Crystal Skull, Indy gets married to Marion, and we assume he lives out the rest of his life as a good husband and father. But in Dial of Destiny, Indy is estranged from Marion, and his son was killed in the Vietnam War. And then by the end of the film, Marion and Indy are back together, and I guess Indy will act as the father figure to Helena. So they unravelled a happy ending from Crystal Skull, and somewhat concluded Dial of Destiny by picking up the pieces and stitching back the same happy ending together, replacing Indy's son Mutt with Helena and having Marion and Indy back together. It just feels very hollow, and demeans a satisfying finish to Crystal Skull. My next issue, which was most certainly speculated on by many before the film's release, was Helena, Indy's goddaughter, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Now she's not a Mary Sue, because she does have many flaws, which are obvious to see, but she's not a rootable protagonist in the slightest. She tricks Indy and steals half of the dial from him, and then locks Indy in a room with Dr. Voller's goons, who have guns with them and have just shot 2 civilians minutes before. So straight away we are introduced to her character as a liar and someone who would happily let Indy die. Then, on numerous occasions, Helena says all she cares about is money. She's way too smug and eyeballs every attractive man she sees. I really can't see her character working for most people, as she just comes off as obnoxious. and it's such a waste. Helena had real potential to be a good companion to Indy. If you swap Helena's arrogant persona with a goddaughter that wants to find the dial, to save her father from his obsession with the device, or to relive her childhood memories, then you make the character a lot more sympathetic and one we can root for. And then there's Teddy, Helena's young sidekick, who is nearly as annoying as Helena herself. He drives a tuk-tuk, pilots a plane, steers a boat, and kills one of Voller's bodybuilder goons. But I had no emotional connection to him whatsoever, just a really bland, and again, unlikable character. And finally, we come to the ending. So they all head through the time fissure into 212 BC, and a visual of them breaking through the clouds and seeing the Roman triremes siege Syracuse is great. From Indiana lecturing his students at the start of the film about Archimedes and his defense of Syracuse, to being able to see the historical battle unfold with his own eyes, Ford sold Indy's sense of awe and wonder really well. Then Indy meets Archimedes, the historical figure he clearly idolised. I thought it was a fitting way to conclude Indy's arc. A man who had such passion and knowledge for history was able to live out his last days being part of a great historic event. And then Helena punches him in the face and takes him back to the present. Not only does this rob Indy of agency, but what gives her the right to knock out her 80-year-old godfather and go against his wishes of how he wants to live the rest of his short life. It just felt so wrong to me. Dial of Destiny chose to take Indy out of his happy ending from Crystal Skull, killed his son, and estranged him from Marion, and to leave him in the past with Archimedes and a time travel device would have been a ballsy and fun way to end the character's adventure. But instead we get the safe option, which tries to redo the happy ending that it destroyed from Crystal Skull. The ending was just a real missed opportunity to do something fresh in my opinion, especially as they did all the setup to put Indy in the past, and then wasted it with an underwhelming ending. Once Dial of Destiny ended, on my way out of the cinema, I looked at the posters on the wall for current and upcoming movies. And there was Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which was brilliant, Oppenheimer, which promises to be an enthralling movie, the poster for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, and finally, in the corner, was Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and it looked at least 30 years out of date. Now I know that the retro throwback aesthetic has been part of the Indiana Jones franchise from its very inception by George Lucas, but I believe this poster perfectly encapsulates everything you need to know about Dial of Destiny. Ford is too old, the side characters look utterly bland, and it offers nothing to attract new audiences, and is fueled by nostalgia. Dial of Destiny is sadly, pun incoming, a relic from a former time that should have never been dusted off and sent out to cinemas in the year 2023, and most certainly shouldn't have had a production budget of $300 million. My rating of 63% for Dial of Destiny is similar to IMDB's user rating of 7 out of 10. The Rotten Tomatoes critics have rated Indy 5 at 66%, whereas the early audience score is 89%. I was really surprised by the audience score, but there have only been a few hundred reviews so far, and I imagine this score will go down quite quickly, once more people have had a chance to see and rate the film. Anyway, what are your views on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny? Did you like it? And what would you rate the film out of 100%? Please let me know in the comments below. If you're new here, then consider liking, commenting, subscribing, and gently tap in the notification bell. It's early days for Film Club, so this really helps the channel to grow. Thank you, and see you again.